Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's great to see people tuning in from all over the world to this latest in our Innovation at Work webinar series. This is our deep dive format, so I'm delighted to say that we have a whole hour together in company with Dr. George Westerman, who's a principal research scientist and senior lecturer at MIT. And George is going to be sharing with us the latest updates on his work about becoming a digital master in today's changing world, and how is it changing over the last 18 months and as we look into the future. So this is incredibly timely, and this is not George's first webinar. Some of you may recognize him from previous ones. So I know that we're in for a treat, and we're all going to leave the next hour with some great insights. So George, on the next slide, I think we have a little bit of information of a biographical nature about you. I think everyone who's tuning in, of course, has already done a little bit of research and knows something about you. I would like just to point out here that George is the author of 3 award-winning books in this domain. Significant contributor to Harvard Business Review and Sloan Management Review, and on top of all that, leads some important initiatives at MIT in the area of digital learning and more broadly the role of digital and digitalization in employment and in the workspace. With that in mind, George also teaches for us in executive education a couple of open enrollment courses listed on this slide: Essential IT for non-IT executives, which is obviously a very important group to make sure that they are digitally savvy and digitally aware, and also an asynchronous course on the Internet of Things, business implications and opportunities. George also teaches quite frequently in our custom programs for companies. Today, we've asked George, as I said, to tell us more about his work in the area of digital mastery. And so today, he's going to really talk to us about 2 sides of this, the digital side, but also the leadership human capabilities side. Expect this to be very applied. George is going to help us find opportunities to improve our capabilities for continuous transformation using digital capabilities, or enhancing our digital capabilities, and importantly, how we all need to change our own mindsets to make this all possible and make this happen and make it be effective. As Lauren said, this is intended to be interactive, so feel free to comment as we go along in the chat. If you have any specific questions you'd like me to put to George later on in the hour, then I'd ask you to try to put them in the Q&A rather than in the chat, if you would. That just helps us manage the questions. So with that, let me hand over the screen to George Westerman. Please, George, take it away, and I'll be monitoring the questions and come back in a little while to help put them to you. George.
Great, thanks, Peter, for that nice introduction, and thanks to all of you who are here from whatever time zone you are in to listen to the presentation. Hopefully I can share some really good information for not only how things have changed in the pre-COVID world, but just how you can set yourselves up to really thrive in the future. So let's go up here. Becoming a digital master in today's changing world. I've been doing research on digital transformation now for about 10 years, before it was really even a phrase that was out there in the world. And what I want to share with you today is what's changed in the last 5 years or so since we published our book on the topic in 2014. What's changed since then? And what we'll find in here is that a lot has changed, and yet a lot has stayed the same. And hopefully that's a good sign for the power of what we did in the research, but also the new concepts that we can apply. So, really critical here, we know that technology moves really quickly in the world. I have to check this slide whenever I do it to make sure these companies are all still alive, because they tend to change very quickly. I just noticed this morning, for example, I've got the Google car on here. Now, a lot of people I know have self-driving cars, and so we can replace that picture. Other pieces there, it's constantly moving, and it's a real struggle to keep up. And those of you who know Moore's Law, you know that technology is doubling in power every 18 months to 2 years. And for the technology people, that's tricky, keeping up with that. For the non-technology people, there's another law that I need to share with you. And this doesn't have a name, we call it first law of digital innovation. If you want to call it George's law, that's fine. Technology changes quickly, but organizations change much more slowly. And we tend to forget this in the technology conversations, that just because the technology is out there, just because AI is getting as good as it is, doesn't mean that it's good in companies yet. That the real hard part here is not necessarily the technology, it's changing your organization to use that technology well. And yet, as we have all that catching up to do, then along came this mess. And you know how hard this has been for everybody, both in terms of personal trials, but also organizational trials. And it's still going on. So, we know how fast everything had to change when everybody got kicked out of their offices. We know that we're thinking now about how to work differently. How might we work in a hybrid or in a more in the office environment? Everything's still very uncertain. So there's a lot of room for innovation in there. And what I'm hoping to do here is give you some ideas on how to think through it. This one, as fast as digital was going, coronavirus happened faster. In fact, this was the joke going around for a little while. Who's leading your digital transformation? Which senior officer? No, it was COVID that was leading it. And this slide actually is really interesting also because just like digital, COVID didn't lead this transition. It forced the transition. It enabled the transition, but then organizations had to lead it. And that's a really critical message to be there, because some led this change better than others, and some are leading the adaptation and the future better than others. So, if we were to revise the George's law here, technologies and markets change quickly, and COVID certainly changed our markets quickly, but organizations change much more slowly. So, when we think about over the last 18 months, we have really done the impossible. And what I mean is not the impossible, but things that we thought were impossible because nobody would accept them. They became very possible very quickly. My wife is a doctor, and that transition to seeing patients over the phone or over Zoom, that was not going to be possible. The insurers wouldn't pay it, the regulators wouldn't allow it, and suddenly within weeks, it became possible. So it wasn't impossible, it's just that the assumption that, the assumption that it was impossible was wrong. That had to be rethought. We have a lot of these situations, right? We couldn't work from home. There's no way that people would be as productive as they could. No way we could collaborate the way that we could. And yet in a lot of white collar work, we've seen working from home works actually really well. It moved from being these experiments, almost a benefit to be allowed to work from home for a day a week, to being something that we all do. And at least all the white collar workers do. And now as we start going back, there's a real question about how that'll look. So this led me to think over the last few months about what are some of the other assumptions that we had. Assumptions that were just absolutely unbreakable assumptions that may not be unbreakable after all. We started seeing this early, and I actually wrote an article on this in the digital world about things that we thought were impossible till digital made them possible. But we should think about it again here in the post-COVID world. What are some of the assumptions we had that just are no longer true, or maybe better said, we need to rethink them and see if they're still true? Our customers really value the human touch. Well, they want personal service. They don't necessarily need it from a person. And we learned that a little bit in the digital world. We learned it even more in the COVID world, where the personal touch, you didn't want to be touching people. You didn't want them anywhere in the room with you anymore. And one of the things we can think about as we start going back is, what do we want to keep from the more digital interactions? How do we want to optimize those personal interactions? Because we can optimize them for what the customer wants, but also we can be very much more efficient in using our people if we do that right. Another one here, the regulators will never let us do that. If you want to kill innovation, somebody's got a great idea, just say the regulators will never do that. That phrase is the fastest way to shut down an innovative conversation that I've ever seen. And people use it very, very well for anything they don't want to happen. So we need to stop that. Number one, we need to stop that. If you have one of your colleagues says it, I think you need to tackle them to the ground and basically beat them till they stop saying that. Now, I'm not going to mean that strong, but it just should not be the first conversation that people go to. Number two, though, let's rethink what the regulators are really doing. I mentioned my wife is a doctor, and the regulators would never let her do remote diagnosis and treatment, but now they do it. And now we have to settle down in there. We've had real questions in academia about what counts as a classroom hour when we're doing these asynchronous kinds of learning, right? And how do you work that with the regulators? Let this count as a real course or not? And we could work through that. So one of the things we found, even in the pre-COVID world, is regulators are actually, they can be a lot more willing to go with innovation than we thought they were if you bring them along for the ride. It's when you spring a wild idea on them later that things can get a little tough. So this is something we really want to revisit. I can wait and watch what others do. That might have been true sometimes in the past, although it was much less true than we thought, because you need to be able to move really, really quickly, and you need to choose the right moves. But certainly in the COVID world, if you were going to wait and watch, you were weeks and months out of business while everybody else was moving. So waiting and watching, you had to do something and then maybe adjust. Our IT unit can't keep up. Well, in the digital world, we were talking about that. One of the things that I'm hearing over and over again in organizations is, respected or not, the IT department saved a lot of companies in that shift to COVID. And so one of the things we want to think about is the way we think about the IT unit really right? Number two, we want to think about on this thing, if the IT unit's slow, is that the IT unit's problem? Or is that maybe our problem in the way that we interact with the IT unit? And certainly we had this course Peter talked about, essential IT for the non-IT executive, that shows how to really bridge that gap a lot better. We're actually doing that course in the first week of August, if you're interested. People won't pay full price for a digital version of our experience. I just paid $30 to watch Black Widow on TV. I never would have done that. That's a movie ticket price, but my wife and I paid $30 to watch a TV show. So certainly this assumption is being rethought very quickly. And we want to think about what else might happen there in this world, especially as we go back. If people aren't in the office, they're not productive. Well, we don't even need to talk about that. Important meetings are better in person, whether they're sales calls or whether they're performance reviews for our customers or just important status meetings, whatever they are. We've learned how to do those. And this one here, video meetings are kind of fun. I'm never going to assume that one again. So the reason I mentioned these, and there are others that we can go through, but the reason I mentioned these is so much of what these assumptions dictate what we see as possible in the future. They dictate what we see as valid in the future. They either limit or unlimit our innovative possibilities in organizations. And as we're in this world of such uncertainty and such fast change, we need to open up our lenses for innovation in every way possible. So one of the ways we can do it is think about what assumptions we have in our heads and what we're going to do about that. I can remember one assumption I had in my head back in the year 2000. I would never put my credit card information online. That's just a dangerous thing to do. Now, 3-4 times a day, it's going online in different ways. And yes, it's a little dangerous, but it also makes commerce work. So let's do a quick poll on this. Let's do a quick poll on this. Can we bring the poll up? There we go. Here are some of the assumptions. Which of the assumptions did the pandemic most cause your organization to rethink? And you can select as many of these things as you think are important assumptions that really had to get a different kind of thinking in this world. So go ahead, jump in, put your votes in, and in about a minute, we'll see what the group has decided. Right now it says the hosts and the panel. Oh, right. So anybody, please go ahead and put your things in there. How's it going there, Laura and Katrina? Are people voting?
They are.
Okay. I'm not seeing the updated data. So I'll take your word for it. Whenever you're ready, go ahead and share it with everybody. Wonderful. Okay, the number one most common ones was this one, and you can see it there, right? Important meetings are better in person. Very closely with, if people aren't in the office, they're not productive. We have certainly learned about that. And as we start going back, it's going to be really interesting to figure out what that looks like. We're going through debates ourselves right now between what it'll take, because we've got certain people that have to be in the office all the time. We've got certain people who write papers all day and they never need to be in the office. And how are we going to make that work? And for example, we're kind of closing on 2 days a week we'll be in the office and all the meetings will happen then. And then the other 3 days will depend on your job and your situation on whether you're in the office or not, you're probably going through similar things. Our customers really, really value the human touch was also another big one there. We've talked about that. One of the things that's where we want to get going now is, how can we optimize that experience for our customers? And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So thanks for sharing that. If you have some other assumptions that you want to key in here, then please just drop them in the chat and we'll try to pick them up as we go along. I see a couple sales advertisements popping into LinkedIn here. You can do with those what you want. But if you have some ideas on assumptions that we didn't list that might have changed over the last couple of years, assumptions that need some rethinking, go ahead and pop it in the chat and we'll come back to that list. Okay, great. So let's jump in here now. There's the poll. As we look forward, what's happened in the 10 years of digital transformation? What's happened in the last 5 years? When that book came out in 2014, we had a lot of good things to say, and a lot of good conversations with businesses. A lot of change happened, but also the world has changed, and people got more comfortable with digital. They got better at making these changes happen, and customers also. You decided how you wanted to work in a different way, and so we've seen in 2021, this last winter, we published another article which was an update on how things have changed over the last 6 years. And what we found is that the two capabilities still are important. You can't just do the digital. You have to also be able to envision and drive change over and over again. Those have stayed the same, but we've seen changes in what makes up both of those to highlight them. On the digital capability, it was always about making your customer experience better. It was always about making your operations better, always about your business model better. What's new here is employee experience. In the last 5 years, we're seeing much, much more attention to employee experience than we ever have before. Employees are being getting the same kind of treatment of the employee experience as the customer experience has for the last 8 or 10 years. And that's good, because we know that happy employees lead to happy customers. We also know that broken processes for our employees actually are broken processes for the company. They're opportunities for failure. And so if we can fix the employee experience, often we're making our company more efficient too. Often we're also finding opportunities for innovation that the employees know about that the leaders might not yet. So employee experience has built up as a really important element here. And some of the pieces of these others have changed. On the leadership side, the idea of envisioning and driving change, we know how to do that. We've known how to do that well for a long time. Digital can make that better. It can make it faster. It can extend the reach and the connectedness of employees and of leaders. One of the things that we found, though, that has emerged very strongly is this idea of digital ready culture. It's something we hinted at in our early research, but it was one of those things that people had not even been making inroads on. Now they are. How can an incumbent company, a traditional company, get a digital enough culture to compete not only with their traditional competitors, but also with the digital entrants that are coming in? So what you want to be is you want to be a digital master. You want to get your digital capability and your leadership capability. You want to have both of them. You can't have just the one. Because if you have the one, the fashionistas, they're doing a lot of digital innovation. They're not connecting it together. They're not rebuilding on each other. They're not really integrating the experience. And as a result, they spend a lot of money. They actually drive some revenue, but they do it at a lower profit margin than their competitors do. Conservatives, on the other hand, trying to get everything perfect before they innovate, they're not able to innovate. And as a result, they're more profitable than their peers because they're not wasting money. But on the other hand, they're not innovating. They're not driving as much revenue through their capacity. And as you're not innovating, of course, that profitability will slowly seep away to your competitors. So what you want is a digital master doing both of these capabilities. And that also enables, at least in our research, higher revenue through your capacity, plus doing it at a higher profit margin. So that's what we want to go for. What I want to go over the next few minutes is just some of these elements here of the digital capability, what they look like these days, to give you some ideas on where to look for innovation in this world. But let me, just before that, let's take a look at some of these assumptions that have come in. One of the assumptions, yes, it takes X years to develop and approve a vaccine. Yeah, we learned that one pretty quickly. Thank you. Federal government can't work remote, just like every organization. We all had to learn that we can do that. It's impossible to hire someone without meeting them in person. Yeah, that's something I hadn't heard before. I think this is a really interesting one. Uh, one of my friends actually was hired remotely, and his company has just given up their office. So they're able to move anywhere in the country and be a productive company. It's a fascinating idea. So he's leaving Boston to go to Utah because it's cheaper and he can go climbing in the afternoons. Digital change and transformation is a thing of the future and for multinationals only. Yes, small companies can definitely start doing this, and we're seeing that. Only way to get truly integrated into our culture, Caroline says, is to spend time together physically. We are having to learn how to do that, right? These are all great assumptions to think about rethinking. We have yet another advertisement for somebody who thinks this is an advertising channel. Feel free to ignore that. We have pre-COVID assumption, can't maintain culture while you're working remotely, great. Another one here, another advertisement coming in here. So please stop the advertisements, everybody. This is not an appropriate channel for that. You can advertise in other places. The pandemic highlighted the dangers of a closed mindset. We needed to be open to new ideas. Adaptability, innovation, and a willingness to try are quickly a new competitive advantage. Great, thank you. Okay, great. So let's come back here and the new DNA of digital masters. Let's take a look now where you can look for opportunities in this new digital space. First of all, so you see this here, we've got these 4 areas: customer experience, operations, employee experience, and business model built on a clean digital platform. So customer experience, you know a lot about customer experience. There's been a lot of really good work that happens in this space. Really critical here is that companies are getting better at the digital experience, and it's no longer just a website or just an app. We're talking about developing a whole experience that's multi-channel rather than omni-channel, rather than a single channel. And we're using that intelligence to do that, and intelligence to develop emotional engagement. So your customers actually start doing some of your work for you. We certainly see that with what's happened with Starbucks and how Starbucks is promoting through their customers and themselves. We're seeing, for example, GiftGap's an interesting company where a large part of their customer support comes from the customers themselves, not from the company. And they're able to leverage their small amount of employees across a large base of customers to do great things. The employee experience is rightly getting far more attention than it ever did before. And so what we're seeing here is, yes, the employee experience itself. Where do we have a process failure that is a signal of needing to improve the information or the processes in our company? Where do our employees need to look things up in 10 different systems when it ought to all be integrated in one place for that view of the customer? Where is there a manual process where there ought to be an automated process? Those kinds of things. But we're also seeing some other elements here. Rather than replacing employees, we're seeing augmentation, helping the employees be better. We're also seeing a lot of effort going into future readying, helping the employees have the skills they need to change. Because if they got the skills they need to change, they'll do better in that job, but they also will not resist the change as much. And we have this interesting work, the Transformer Chief Learning Officer, about the digital transformation of the learning and development function. And more we're seeing flex forcing, really interesting ways to augment your staffing in interesting ways, kind of a gig workforce that's available, but we're seeing the gig workforces being more tuned to the company, using your alumni, using your retirees, using others who really know your company well, so they can come in and be productive very quickly and go away, as opposed to the truly gig people who have to still come up to speed. There are only special tasks you can give them in there. So these elements here are, we're also seeing retraining, so people can do multiple jobs inside a company and they can shift as they need to. This employee experience, if you are not paying attention to employee experience, then do it. If there's one takeaway from this thing, if you're not doing employee experience, give it some effort. And we actually have a very interesting webinar coming up August 5th, I believe, about empowering your employees in a different way on that. How are we augmenting? Well, for example, this is my favorite case study I've ever done. I got to go walk around an aircraft carrier being built. And I was amazed. You know these are big ships until you get on them and you realize just how big they are. Just getting from the surface up to the level where some of the work was being done that I was going to observe was about a 15-minute walk. Up some gangways, down to the ends of the ship, up some more, back and forth. It was impressive to get there. think about what that means when you got to go down and get the blueprints to figure out what to do in that little room where you're hanging a bracket or doing some wiring. It's something that may be a little daunting, and so you might just try to do this on your own instead. What they did here was interesting. They started to design the ships digitally, and they said, well, then we shouldn't be doing blueprints. We should be doing something else. So what they've done now is they give their instructions on a tablet device. For example, this gentleman's got to hang a bracket on the wall here. He's going to have to do some drilling and some welding to hang a bracket on the wall. You can see the green is where they want that. Sorry, it's that device on the wall. You can see where the device wants to go. You can see also where he should not do any drilling at all, because there's an electrical box right behind there. Not the kind of place you want to drill. So not only does he know better where the thing's supposed to go, but he also knows what to do to avoid dangerous errors, to avoid rework. Think about this of the people running wires on these ships. It could take 5 shifts of people to run wires from one end to the other. Now this device can tell you, run the wire up this way and around, and then run the green one that way and the blue one that way. And when the shift change happens, then the next person knows exactly where you left off, and they can do it. They can pick it up without mistakes. Which pump has some troubles to work on? Oh, I can see it's the red one. Can I lift that box? Well, if it's red, I need to get a friend to lift it. Maybe I can avoid some back problems that way. This is all augmentation in the construction industry. This augmentation can happen in white collar work all the time too. From customer experience to employee experience, now we've got operations. Operations, clearly digitalizing your processes is important, but then what do you do with that? Data-driven decision-making. Use that data. Every single interaction with the customer, every single time an employee touches a system, that's data to improve the processes you're working with. You can do experimentation around that data. Then in addition, there's this idea of being much more connected and dynamic. Things are becoming possible that were impossible that used to, things are becoming possible that used to be impossible. Rio Tinto is putting so much automation into their mines in Australia that they're getting rapidly to the point where nobody will ever get hurt in a mine again, because nobody will ever be working in a dangerous situation. All the dangerous work will be done by machines. That's pretty neat, right? Daimler Trucks did a really interesting thing a few years back. Rather than having the check engine light go on your truck, now the check engine light goes on and you get a call telling you what's wrong. And they tell you either, big problem, get it fixed right away, come to this location and we'll fix it in an hour. Or they say, not a big problem, when's the time to come in and change that filter? All they did was get information from your truck to somebody who can make a decision. But then the whole customer experience is better. So how are you connecting in better with the sensors to get there better too? Then there's the business model. Yes, we all want to be the Uber of our industry, these multi-sided platform businesses. And we have courses that can teach you how to do that well. It's complicated. It can be expensive. It can require a lot of luck, and it's not for every company. There are certainly roles you can play in those multi-sided platforms, those kinds of things. But there's an awful lot of opportunity available to everybody that's faster and lower risk, but still can give you a lot of value. One here is just digital enhancements. How can you add the digital on top of what you're doing to make things better? Whether that be your digital sales channel, whether it be a digital addition that helps you use the product better. And then there's also the information-based service extensions. For example, what Michelin is doing with its tires, they'll happily sell you tires, but if you run a fleet of trucks, they will happily also tell you which tires need to be replaced next before they fall off of the truck or cause trouble for that truck. They'll manage that whole process for you, so you just can get in there and manage it at the right speed, the right time. And certainly those of you in America, you know Flo. She's underwriting car insurance she Progressive underwrites car insurance, and now many companies are doing this by actually monitoring your driving behavior. And then they can do a better job than anything else of understanding how they should price your insurance. That little device on your car measures how fast you accelerate, how fast you brake. It measures when you go around a corner, whether you do it on 2 wheels or on 4 wheels. And when they measure those things, they can get a good idea. Am I an old driver who never preach the speed limit, which is pretty what I do now? Or am I a 16-year-old kid who takes all kinds of chances, which my son did it for a little while, and certainly which I did when I was 16 years old too. So they can rate our insurance better by having better information about what's out there. So these are the business models. So the enhancements, the digital extensions are available to everybody, regardless of your role in the large multi-sided platforms. So I've given you 4 places to look for opportunities in there. It, of course, all is on top of the getting your IT and your platform straight, making sure you can clean that up the best way. One of the things we've learned is the cleaner the core of your IT and processes are, the better you can innovate around the edges. And so you want to be able to do that. But those 4 areas, customer experience, employee experience, operations, business models, hopefully I've given you some ideas where to look. And then you can go out and do some really powerful things. Now, I've got a few more things I want to say about leadership. This seems like a good place to stop for a little bit of Q&A.
Great. Thank you, George. I've definitely been getting some comments and some questions coming in. One set, just going back to what you were saying about sort of like the digital experience. You know, one of the things that a couple of people have been asking about is there further that we can go in the sort of the digital interactive experience? So we just began to sort of scratch the surface of technologies like virtual reality. You showed an example of augmented reality. Are you seeing that as something which there's going to be a lot more of, or has something different happened in the last 18 months where we're valuing the physical more in some ways?
Absolutely. You know, Zoom has taught us what you can do in a remote environment, and that's going to help us with our global collaboration and those things. VR and AR have had a lot of promise for a long time, but there was a challenge there about making sure that people had the devices that could do it. And these devices are becoming cheaper, but they still aren't quite there yet to be mass market. So I have a lot of I feel very bullish on VR and AR in the future, as soon as it becomes something that everybody can adopt for a reasonable price. Where are we seeing it now? Certainly in operations. We're seeing it in maintenance, where it can help you understand how things should look and where to go. We're seeing it in operations, in assembly, in manufacturing to help you put things together, like I talked about on the ship. We're seeing it in training in big ways, either AR-based training or an expert who can watch and see what you're seeing and help you think through the problem that you're trying to solve. Those are all happening really well now in some companies, and they're going to happen more. Where is it going to go? We are doing some research right now to help students in manufacturing programs understand how to use the expensive machines before they touch the machines, so that they're not going to break the machine when they get there, and they're going to be much more efficient on those machines, because those machines are really a bottleneck for a lot of manufacturing training things. Similarly, in the biology labs, in the wet labs, how can you be ready when you get there? And there will be more and more opportunities for this. We're also doing something interesting with virtual reality. We're doing some experiments right now to get at human skills. And are there ways with augmented reality, or eventually with chatbots, to be able to test your empathy, to be able to test your problem-solving skills, to be able to test your critical thinking in a role play with another person or with a machine in ways we never could before. So that's a very long answer to say, yes, there seems to be a big future as long as we can get over this challenge of getting the right devices into people's hands for a cheap price.
Great, thank you. So some of these things are taking longer, perhaps, to become reality than we thought a few years ago. Before we move on, one other question that I just noticed was you said quite quickly something about the cleaner our processes are, the more able we are to innovate around edges. Could you just sort of expand a little bit on that and perhaps give an example?
Sure. You know, when you talk to IT people, they'll be really clear. They've got this very complicated term for how systems typically look in their companies. They call it spaghetti, and legacy spaghetti. And the point is that, you know, if we build up our processes and we build up our systems over time, and we put on multiple exceptions, and we've bought companies and sold companies, and we've changed our product lines around, you end up having this just jangled mess where information flows in one place and you have no idea quite what happens to it when it gets to you. Or, you'll see the symptom of this where you've got, just getting a single view of your customer in many companies can be very, very difficult because it's in many different companies, many different parts in the companies. You might be integrating by spreadsheet or by other ways. This is the challenge, because if you have those messy processes, if you got those messy systems, that means any change you make can have unintended consequences you don't know about. It also means when something breaks, you actually don't know what else might break in there. And you also have just the constant process of just cleaning up the information and getting over the exceptions and all that kind of stuff. So what we talk about is, can you make that core information about customers and about products and about performance as clean as it can be, so your company can use it and you can be efficient with it? And then when you get that in place, then you can start to build around the edges to build new products or to build new windows into the data, that kind of thing. So if you have spaghetti, what we say is turn it into lasagna, much better structured kind of a meal where you know what's going on. Eventually change it into ravioli. So you got pieces of functionality that you know how they fit together, and you can make that great meal happen the way you need to.
That's a great metaphor. I'm going to be thinking about that for a while, especially when
I wish I had invented that. Somebody told, I can't remember who said it. I'm just repeating it.
That's good. I think one more question, which I think could be a plan as a lead into what I think you're going to talk about next. This is so Adrian is saying, look, as someone who's kind of in the middle of an organization, I'm not the CEO, I'm not a senior executive. How do I influence the senior management and the leadership of an organization to understand and act on this question of becoming a digitally masterful organization?
Adrian, this is a real challenge in companies. So thanks for bringing this up. What we say is the digital transformation needs to be led from the top, but you can decide what the top is. So if you're in middle management, that means that there are certain parts of your organization that you can already influence and you can drive change in that organization. But if you're in middle management, also the fact you've gotten to middle management means you've gotten reasonably good at influencing upward too. So what I'd say in middle management, manage the transformation below you as well as you can, and just make the cases, keep talking about the opportunities in clear, compelling language above you so things can start to happen there. Certainly managing up is a lot harder than managing down, but it can be done very effectively.
That seems like an excellent lead into talking about leadership, George, which I think is maybe
okay.
You're about to go.
Great. So yeah, really critical. This is more than a technology problem. It's a leadership one, right? And we don't want to forget that leadership, because in the digital transformation area, it's easy to go right to the sexy technologies, right to the cool stories, but forget about how those stories happened. And the leadership is important. And we see the leadership as being made up of 5 elements. It was 4 and it's become 5 over the last few years. You need just a clear vision. You need to be able to paint a compelling picture of how your organization is going to be different and better in the future. From there, you want to engage your employees in that vision. You want them not only to see what that vision means, but you want to see that vision is good for them as customers. I knew a lot of banks over the last few years that were trying to take costs out of their operations. 2 visions I heard. One was the efficiency vision, and the other is the agility and innovativeness vision. Now, both of those sets of banks were doing the same thing. They were cleaning up their infrastructure. They were rationalizing their products. They were making their operations more efficient. But if you're an employee, which one do you want to be part of? The efficiency one means probably if you're 30% more efficient, it's likely that one of the 3 of you is not going to be here anymore. And it's likely the stockholders may benefit, but you're going to be working harder. That's one way to see the efficiency vision. The other vision is agility, straight through, innovative. That's something I want to be part of. So that vision needs to be compelling not only for the outside world, but also for your employees so they can make it happen. One of my favorite stories of a bank is a bank that said, let's make banking joyful at DBS Bank. And I don't know, it's an interesting question, what makes banking joyful? But we do know what makes banking unjoyful. And so then they empowered all of the employees to figure out what makes banking unjoyful and to fix that. And it was better for the employees, better for the customers, and actually ultimately better for the stockholders too. So you have a vision, you need to engage your employees so that they adopt that. They believe it, they want to make it happen. And then you want to govern. And governance is the steering wheel. We like to think about governance as the brake pedal. It's really a steering wheel. How can we keep going in the right direction and cut down some of those things that might be taking us where we don't want to go? So if you think about that, then we're taking a trip. The vision is where we want to go. The engagement is our engine. The governance is our steering wheel. When we get there, we go back and adjust that vision and continue the journey on to more places. So what do we mean about technology leadership and culture? Well, we have not found companies that are able to do this without involving their IT staff. Now, sometimes the IT staff lead it. Very often, you've got a group leading it, working very closely with the IT group also. We haven't seen people leaving their IT people out of the loop. So fixing those relationships, getting IT to be faster, but also working with them right. And this one here has been added in the last few years, the digital ready culture. So I want to say a little bit more on that. So the leadership capabilities, the vision, engagement, governance, propel you down the road in the way that you want to go. The leadership and the culture make that road smoother, and it makes your engine more efficient in moving along that road. So the culture is an interesting angle. I heard over the last 6 years or so, executives in every industry saying, that's great for the Googles of the world, but we can't get that culture. Or I'd hear, if only we had the culture of Apple, we'd be so much better off. And I would listen to it and I'd say, yeah, you're probably right. And then I started asking, well, what does that really mean? What does that mean for your company? Can you do that? And it became really clear in studying the cultures of those organizations that the practices that they have may not work in your organization. The way they hire and fire and pay people may not be appropriate for your organization. The way the transparency they put in there may or may not be appropriate for your organization. But on the other hand, they don't have many of these startups don't have 100 years of history. They don't have the millions of customers you do. They don't have the assets you have to build upon. Even the oldest of these companies is now, 25 years old. So it's a different kind of situation. So what we did in this study is try to understand how can you build digital culture in traditional organizations, and came up with some very interesting answers. We compared values and practices in digital and non-digital companies to understand how you can get as innovative as you can be without having to adopt some of the practices that just aren't going to work in a traditional physical product-based company. And what it comes down to, there's a whole article you can see here, right? But there are 4 values that you need to foster in your organization. Speed. We should be about getting things done quickly, moving fast, and fixing it later rather than waiting for all the answers. Not normal for a lot of companies, but we need to get there, right? It's much more agile. Changing the goal from profitability to impact. How are we going to change the world? How are we going to make it a better world, not just how are we going to make money in it? Autonomy is a good one, and autonomy is an interesting one. We talk about autonomy as swim lanes. You understand where the swim lanes are, and you have freedom to act within those swim lanes. And when you cross the swim lanes, then you need to start talking about how to get other people involved. On the other hand, we also see openness. The willingness to engage within your team, but also across swim lanes in a very, very open way. We talk about talent, not title. Innovating working inside and outside your organization, of course, within rules to make great things happen. So one of the things you want to think about here is, do you have these values? Have you got these values in place to really work in a more digital ready way? And then we got the practices, because the practices make the values real. And here you've got, number one, you want to build a new set of practices that are all about innovating at internet speed. Rapid experimentation, self-organizing to do it. Teams come together, they try to solve a problem. When it's ready, they disband and they come back to solve another problem. And managing everything by the data to the extent possible. You got to build those. We know how to do that. Companies that are becoming agile have learned how to do this, and we're getting better and better at it. There are some things that traditional companies have that the digital companies have to learn, and it's really about maintaining integrity, giving your employees some stability. We find in our research, you do not need to give those up. And in fact, as the digital companies make mistakes in learning those, you already have those processes in place. So you want to keep them. Just make sure they're not getting in your way. Make sure that they're about maintaining those values without slowing you down. And last is to reorient. Both traditional and digital companies feel they are customer responsive. Both traditional and digital companies feel they are results oriented, but they do them differently. If you're managing by the quarterly numbers, you're at least half a quarter behind all the time. You need to be managing by the most real-time numbers you can find. That's the results orientation. But if you're asking your customers what you want, you're only half right, because so many of the innovations come because you're doing things that the customers don't know they need until they see it. And so that's where the experimentation can help you to put those things out there, see how the customers respond, and then move on. So this was a quick look through what could be a 3-hour talk just by itself. It's possible to do this culture. We see it happening in every industry. And there's an article there, but we can definitely talk about that more. So, when we talk about these leadership capabilities, the vision, the engagement, and governance, we know how to do that. We've known about how to do that, how to drive change in your organization. The technology, leadership, and culture become the clean road, the oil that makes these things just much smoother and much faster as we move along. The really critical part about this is that people are mattering more than ever. COVID has taught us this. COVID has also taught us that people can be more resilient than ever. But if we missed this concept before, let's make sure we know it going forward. People make organization work. Leaders don't. Leaders don't do anything. Leaders get people to do the right thing. And so how do we get our people? Excite them around the right kind of mission, enable them to do great work, and then listen to them. What's working? What's not? How can we move there? And that'll help you do the impossible. That's where we want to go. So to let you know that one of the things that Peter mentioned is I'm involved in workforce learning right now. I'm spending the last couple of years trying to rethink what does digital mean for the way we help people get the skills, help them progress in their careers the way that they want. And so we got this group called JWell Workforce Learning. You can see about it. And we're about giving people the right ideas on what might be good for their next step, changing the learning to make it more atomized in the moment for them, and then also getting the credentials. Sloan Exec Ed has been a leader in this, in changing the way people get the skills they need and helping to let those skills be known. Peter and his team were doing digital learning before it was sexy. One of the reasons we have been able to do digital learning as well as we have in Sloan Exec Ed is because we've been doing it for multiple years before then, before it was needed in COVID. And we're now doing more and more experiments to do great things in that world. And there are certificates and things you can get in Sloan Exec Ed that can also recognize the skills that you've learned here. So advice, learning, and credentials for the people. And we're also thinking about enabling infrastructure and tools, skill frameworks, credential tools, these kinds of things that can help you get through. Just some ideas, some articles we've talked about. The human skills matrix. How do you want to think about those non-technical skills? Some empirical work we've done. I got to do a session at the UN, which was really cool. And just want to let you know for next week, those of you who care about, in the US at least, the community college education system. How can we link community college education and employers to make that transition happen better for workers? We're doing a really, really interesting 2-day conference next week. It's free and open to all people at massbridgesummit.org, so you can get there. So thank you, Peter, for letting me talk about JWell a little bit too in this process.
Of course, thanks very much, George. I think all these initiatives are incredibly important ingredients of not only understanding what the potential is, but really helping empower people and organizations to do something. So, with that in mind, we have been getting a number of questions that you've touched on, but we haven't addressed the questions yet about what is, in your view, both the opportunity and any advice that you might have for companies or individuals that are really looking at this skill building question. The speed with which we have to build these new skills just seems to be increasing according to Moore's law as well. And we're still the basic human beings that we were tens or hundreds of thousands of years ago. So, what's your advice based on your experience so far on ways that organizations and individuals should really be thinking differently and empowering themselves and their people around the skills acquisition.
So we have this very interesting article. You can look it up, called the Transformer CLO. And what we found is there's a new model emerging, and that model is becoming more and more mandatory in organizations. The model that I grew up with in the 80s for learning and development is still around in a lot of companies, which is that we're going to just hang up a catalog of courses and you figure out how to take them. And that is not working anymore. I'm sorry, just a second. My power cord had come out of my computer, so let me just plug that in. So if you want to look up the Transformer CLO, what do we find? Learning and development organizations need to take much more responsibility for getting people the skills they need, not for providing courses for people, for helping the organization to be ready to change. That's number one. We need to change the goals of L&D. Number two, we need to change the way that the courses are delivered. It needs to be much more atomized, personalized, in the moment, in the flow of what you're doing. And there are really exciting ways to do that, especially in the digital world. And number three, the units themselves are changing. Much more curation rather than creation, much more agile and lean and strategic in the way that they've been working. So from a corporate L&D standpoint, we have a model that you can look at and see what those are. And we've got ongoing conversations with L&D leaders. Let me just say one more thing. If you're not an L&D leader and you're an employee in this organization, it's time to insist on this working better. It's time to make sure that that you are getting the kind of help you need to get the skills you need. It's better for the company, it's better for you, and then it ultimately will be better for the customers and the financials. So I just realized that my camera has frozen. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Okay, great. So that's not the most flattering picture there, but that's what you're stuck with for a little bit until my camera figures out what to do.
Just demonstrating practically some of the challenges that we still have with digital technologies, I'm sure, as well. So turning now to some questions that were a little related to that, I think. So the theme might have been, and you touched on this, the question of digital culture. Maybe one of the assumptions that's been around for a while as well is that, to have this digital culture, what we really need are so-called digital natives, and so we should really be looking to bring in a lot of, in many cases, I suppose, younger people, but although that's maybe not the right way to think about it. But is that something that George, that you've seen in companies that are becoming digitally masterful, or is it actually a transformation from people of all ages and experiences and level of seniority? And what's your advice to companies that are?
It's absolutely a transformation at all levels, and especially at the senior levels, to accept this agile way of working. It means a different way of doing capital budgeting. It means a different way of doing performance management on initiatives. It means a different way of thinking about failure when you go there. Absolutely, the top of the organization needs to get more comfortable with this world. As far as hiring more of the digital natives, I think that's happening naturally. We have a lot more retirement going on. The baby boom has, they're all starting to retire. We're getting much more digitally native people coming in. So as leaders, try to listen to some of those people. I know one CEO that has a monthly lunch with one of the people that got hired 3 years earlier. And her job is just to say, how does this company work for the digital natives? And also, by the way, to teach him some things like about social media and stuff that he might be afraid to ask about. It just works for him. So yes, it's got to be all levels.
Great, thank you. Now, Caroline has asked a very important question about what is the role for ethics in the future that is upon us, or that we're creating. What is all of our responsibility in your view, and how should we address that to deal with issues, everything from the new risks that we're reading about and experiencing, from things like cybersecurity through to unintended consequences of the way that we use technology, and it's building in implicit biases, for example. What's your sense of the importance of those things, and what's your advice on how we should be thinking about and doing something about those questions?
As far as I'm concerned, ethics are essential to everything we do. I choose not to work with unethical people. And I think customers are starting to do that too. We found in our research that your company can maintain its integrity and its processes of integrity without slowing down the innovativeness. So I think, first of all, we should assume that it's essential. The idea that it's profits only, it's shareholders only, I know our entire ecosystem in the US and in Europe and other parts of the world is starting to wake up to demand some social responsibility from their businesses, not just demanding profits from those businesses. So the really tough part for me on ethics is not wanting it or not doing it. That's hard. The really tough is what you started leading into, Peter, where we have got the unintended ethical issues. And we're seeing this a lot in AI, that too much faith in the algorithm may have you forget that biased data will lead to biased outcomes. Or that there may be just biases in how you're choosing to look at things. So that's the really dangerous thing, I think, right now for ethics. Trusting the tools and not thinking about what the ethics of what the biases are they're building to those tools.
Great. Well, I think that's maybe an important concept to end on. In fact, that you've shared with us in many ways both what the opportunities are, including ones that we perhaps had assumptions that would not be opportunities or would not be possible, and in the last year or so, and as we look into the future, we're really having a different relationship to those assumptions and hopefully different kinds of visions. You've shared with us the operational and kind of implementation challenges, and just now you shared with us kind of going back to that vision question, the importance of the vision being one that is really not only for the improvement of organizations, but in a way that is impactful, we use that word, and the benefits not only to business, but to society. That's very core to our values here at MIT. And George, it's wonderful to see someone so articulating that so well. And again, as we mentioned at the beginning, as I just really turns to me to thank you, George, for this hour, which went by so quickly. I wish we had another hour to keep going, but we're almost at the end of it. But George, you do have these courses coming up in MIT Sloan Executive Education, Essential IT for Non-IT Executives, and the Internet of Things Business Implications. There are new runs of those in August, October, November. So plenty of opportunities to learn more with George about these topics. Thank you all for joining us today. We have, as George mentioned, also a LinkedIn Live event planned for August the 5th about empowering workforce success in a digital world. So it dovetails very much with the ideas that George has been sharing with us today. And that will be with our MIT colleagues, Hal Gregerson and Christine Deary. So I hope many of you can join us for that. Thank you again, everyone. Thank you, George, for a truly fascinating and valuable and impactful hour out of your time. We really appreciate you spending the time with all of us. And it just remains for me to say goodbye to everyone for now. Keep on innovating, and we look forward to seeing many of you soon in future webinars and in executive classes.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Peter, for the opportunity.